Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. As I talked about in a video about Biden's arrival to Kyiv, Putin's speech was completely unimpressive and a waste of time. But we're going to talk about it in the second part of the video. Right now, let's quickly go over the front lines and we're gonna see if anything changed. Right now, Ukraine is on the defensive, so what we need to understand is that if the front lines are not moving, it is good. Ukraine is essentially defending their land and buying time until they get into the counteroffensive, which is expected around May, June. There are still right now rumors happening around the fact that Ukraine is being pushed to counterattack in the next 2 weeks. But to be honest, no proper military analysts is saying that. It's only the media. And media is known to overhype certain things, and we're going to touch about this a little bit later. So the northern part, it's the same thing as the north part. We know that Russia here, they took the village and it was all over the news, but we need to understand that that village was just in the gray zone. Russia did not really advance. Ukrainians have here quite a small bridgehead. I do hear reports that some troops are still gathering in this area and they're trying to push towards Kupiansk, which is over here. But overall, so far, no advancements. Heavy fighting is happening around Kremina, Zarishny Yampil, and all of these areas. So again, nothing changes. There is movement here and there. We see videos of Ukrainians destroying Russian attack groups, and then Russians also sending their war footage. So the fights are happening here intensively, but no changes on the land. The most intense fight is around Bakhmut. Obviously, this is where the main spearhead. Now it's kind of clear that Russians really wanted to grab Bakhmut before the speech of Putin. Again, something we're going to talk more about in details when I'm going to cover that. But overall, Bakhmut was not captured. The salient that we talked about before in my previous map update, I told you that it was just the initial groups that were reaching Yahidne. Right now, we know that more of a main force is reaching Yahidne. The fighting is really hard. Reports are that on this part of the front, Ukrainians are constantly being pushed, and then Ukrainians are counterattacking and pushing Russians out. The problem is right now that Ukraine cannot really take a very solid hold, to form the positions for this line. So they're holding Russians off, but it's a very fluid line in a way that they can hold it off. So the fighting is extremely intense. It's a close quarter fighting, so Russia has a lot of advantage here just because they have more men and they are not really taking care about this men. So really, really intense fighting, and it's not a very nice thing to be at. But besides that, we also hear that Ukrainians are counterattacking. For example, we've heard that there was counterattack towards this controlled area here, that Russians were at the road, and there are some Ukrainian forces are counterattacking. Overall, tactical movements. Ukraine is still not allowing Russians to go forward in Yahidne, but the position is obviously not nice. No one wants to be in this situation ever. Well, no one wants to be in a war ever, probably, but what to do. But overall, we do know that Russians are experiencing, wouldn't just say lack of morale, let's put it this way, but Wagners are thinning out. Right now they're crying, but what actually a lot of people is saying that the ammo supply to Wagner right now, it's not that they are not receiving ammo like at all, that they are now starting to receive ammo as just a normal Russian military unit. So before that, we did knew that Wagner, once they were on this front line, that they were having more artillery dedicated to them, that they were having more ammo dedicated to them. And now, because there is action all over the front lines, the Wagners just don't have the priority support. So now they just suddenly, like, why it's such a big deal for them, it's because now they are suddenly seeing how the Russian army looks all over the front line, because the Wagnerites are not receiving special treatment in this area. Beyond that, We know that Ukrainians are holding the Russians off on the east side. Again, close quarter fighting, super intense. And Ukrainians are holding off Ivanivsky and holding off especially this area here. It's zone 2, I'll put it here, where Russians really want to kind of get into that area and put get into the road and try to maybe go towards Kromove to essentially start closing that gap between Yahidne, Kromove, and so on. So, and circle this way. This is not happening. Ukrainians are pushing them back on the south side. So, if we drop the constantly used preamble that intense fighting, then Ukrainians are doing the best that they can. Around Avdiivka, the most intense fightings right now are happening around Vesele and Krasnohorivka here, and also around Nevelsky over here and Pervomaisky over here. So Russians really looking for any kinds of advancements. It's been the same pattern. Like, it's a defense line that's been here for as long as it takes. Russians are trying really hard at one place, then they try from another angle, and then doing it again and again and again. It's nothing new, and they're dying there by hundreds. Some time ago, Russians tried to essentially do Marinka semi-encirclement movement. At least it looks like. They said, like, well, why are we trying to go through the middle of Marinka if we can just, like, try to and then take it around and so on. Obviously everything failed, and people that are defending Marinka are complete heroes. We do find more information about the area around Vuhledar, that it was a lot more damage done to the Russians than it was expected. They're still sending men in there because it was not just the 155 Marines brigade that got destroyed. There's actually other ones, and they're still sending troops. Now it's like a small groups tactics essentially, but they're still running in those small groups across the fields, and they're seen, and they just continued being destroyed. It's not really, it's different kind of tactic, so it's not as flashy as seeing lines and columns of destroyed vehicles, but it's the same thing. And obviously, the main kind of thing that everyone knows about is that there was explosions in Mariupol, explosion in Makivka, explosions in Ilovaisk. So explosions deep within behind the Russian front lines. And people say that most probably it was something quite long range. It might have been, but it might have not been, because, to be honest, it's not like it was like 100 and something kilometers. People say that it was just over like 70 kilometer strikes. So while one might think that, yes, that maybe HIMARS didn't go that close, overall, it might have been also the at least first batch of the GLSDB, the long-range missiles, that already were working one night. So there was a lot of those explosions. And this obviously, if it was GLSDB, this would make sense, because we know that Biden came to Ukraine, and usually when something like this happens, like when a leader of the state comes to visit Ukraine, they usually also bring presents, so to say. So when Biden came to Ukraine, the package that he's unrolled was pretty unimpressive. I would imagine that the impressive part was the secret part of that message that was just never disclosed. So we might have actually seen that Biden came with the first delivery of potentially GLSDB. That would make sense. If it was indeed, then Russians are in for a hard awakening, especially because we've seen the temperature. The ground is going to become soft, the ground is going to become wet and muddy, and if it also means with that long-range missiles are finally in place, then this Russian offensive is done. Then Russia is just going to suffer explosion after explosion of their logistical chains, and once they finally maybe start rebuilding by the end of spring, that's when Ukraine is going to hit, and it's going to hit hard. Very bad news for Russians. But now, please like, subscribe, and share a link to this video. I really appreciate it. It really helps the channel grow. And we're getting the message about the war in Ukraine out there, beating all of those propagandists. And let's now talk about Putin's speech. It was a complete wet fart, or as people corrected me, something that is referred to as shart. And it was long, it was tired and it lacked any kind of impact whatsoever. Putin came out to the crowd and just spoken there for 2 hours about stuff. And you don't need to listen to it. Like, there is not a lot of things. But generally speaking, the speech can be divided into three segments. And we're going to talk about each one of them. The segment number one is Ukraine and generally everything about this war. And if we drop all of the fluff, which has like no resemblance to reality whatsoever, like biolabs, Nazis, like NATO expansion, yada, 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 all the other BS, then the key things that observers noticed about this speech, and I noticed as well because I listened to this whole thing and it was terrible, was the fact that it was just full of excuses. When he was talking about of Ukraine, it was basically he's repeating the same statement again, and again. And the statement was, well, it wasn't me, it's like I was just forced to, it's like, unfortunately, things are not going as well. Well, he never said that it was not going as well, but he was saying is like, yes, unfortunately, we had to do something and so on. And he was asking almost for forgiveness. He was almost preparing a ground for his essentially defense in Hague. I am 110% certain that if he lives to the tribunal, he's going to repeat exactly what he said in that speech to the Hague court, saying that, well, it was all of the NATO expansion, like all of these things. But the key point, something that we did not hear in the speech, and people very, very thoroughly noted this in the comments to the post in the community tab, was that we did not hear anything about Russian victories. Bakhmut was not taken. Nothing was taken. So he had nothing. He had nothing to say. And he basically just said a lot of sorries and excuses, and there was no speaking about how great Russia are and how he is dominating Ukraine. This is a huge difference from the previous year at the same time, when he was sitting on his chair and leaning across the tables and saying, I am the ruler of this part of the world and I command this country to stop existing. That was him at the last year. This year, he's basically asking for forgiveness from everyone, to say we don't have anything to show, and it was a flop. Like pro-Russian, like this genocide supporting community went completely mad. Not only because of the speech and like after the visit of the Biden, but when they saw that it's their ruler that is coming out as weak, that is coming out as a reactive, essentially. When you stop being an active, like a person that is driving the war, when you stop being this hard man, like essentially like a leader, like a Führer, essentially, like the leader of the nation, then at that moment, he's just becoming pitiful. And all of the pro-Russian like war supporters, they felt into despair. The amount of despair that they wrote in their Telegram channels, like the sadness that they shared, is actually impossible to describe. Then was the second part of the message. And the second part of the message was focusing on Russia's internals. And if we drop the contents, because contents had nothing to do with reality, like he was saying that everything is okay, Russian economy is like doing so well, pulling all of the different numbers that make no sense. Like, for example, I think the most accurate example would be that he says like, oh, our grain producers like has gathered so much grain like last year. Wow, we are like putting the grain through the rockets, missing the point that, well, yes, they did gather a lot of grain, but like almost half of that grain is they are not being able to sell. So the grain is just rotting in their storages. And because that was so much grain, then even the producers of grain, the farmers, they get almost no profits from it. So, and that's with everything. Like, for example, like, oh, we got like, like this part of economy is growing and this part, and ignoring the rest part of the economy that went completely into nuts. So basically, he was picking and choosing what to talk about, and he was trying to tell it in such a calm and like boring manner, like trying to say is like, oh, it's like it's this is normal, things are happening, war is happening, but like we're fine, like we're okay. And that came across only as like nothing is fine. He has no cards up his sleeve. He's literally just dragging time. He does not have anything to answer for. He's basically just trying to win time for him. And I think like the most things, like the funniest things about his this part was that he mixed and flip-flopped between talking about the Luhansk and Donetsk Ukrainian or like the parts of Ukraine from of Luhansk and Donetsk that are occupied. He talks about them sometimes as those independent republics, or sometimes he flops and talks about them as part of the Russia already, because remember he annexed that part of the Russia. So he even his own speech, he doesn't have consistency in whether or not these parts of Ukraine that are he supposedly annexed are actually part of Russia now. It is hilarious. Then there was the message to oligarchs, which is basically saying is like, you better not get that money out of Russia or we're gonna, judge you. That was the weakest threat ever. And it just was like adding additional stacks on his weakness. And moreover than not, like there was the pitifulness of him. He addressed part of his speech to business in Russia, and he's saying is like, please don't leave Russia. He literally was begging business to stop doing business with the outside world, to stop investing in that other country, the dirty West, and start essentially investing into Russia, because like Russia is such a big and prosperous nation and such a big future is awaiting. And basically he was talking all the Chuche North Korean talking points. So complete BS, internal policy, firstly completely uninteresting to us, but also continuing his trend of being a completely pitiful and weak presentation. And then the last part, something that because of his speech being so weak, and because like there should have been something, the Western media again blew everything out of proportion. His speech ended, I was like, oh, what a boring piece of shit. And then like I read Western articles, Putin escalating nuclear race. I was like, what the hell are you talking about? So, and it was about the fact that Putin stated that, and I quote, we pause our participation in this new START deal that they have. And he specifically also explained that they are pausing participation and not backing out of the deal. He actually clarified it. And the interesting part, like why it doesn't matter at all, firstly, because it's a deal with Putin. Like if he wanted to participate and be obliged by any rules, that would be one thing. But we know he doesn't care. So why any piece of paper supposedly would stop him if he wanted to do anything? Like let's just apply like at least a sense of logic. Secondly, it was a deal that was already essentially paused and like de facto paused and not working since I think late 2019. Like so it's supposed that in this deal that there would be commissions from different countries coming and inspecting nuclear weapons of Russia and participating in that and otherwise, like so they don't have the weapons production, but they haven't been doing that. So de facto the document wasn't already working. And most importantly, the document was until 2026. So in 2026, it would be running out of its place again. So in a dry, like when you stop reading the headlines of the mainstream media, which is like, could we get anything out of this speech? And because they couldn't, they just like, okay, whatever, nuclear threat. Yes, that will do. And basically there is nothing. So it was a deal that was not working already, that would automatically get out of commission in like 3 years. And more importantly, Putin didn't really care about the deal at all, because he doesn't care about deals, period. Because no signature has ever stopped Putin. Any international deal that would impede whatever Putin wanted, he would instantly back out of. So while why people think that something happened, I don't know, because literally nothing happened. So overall, we can say about the speech the following: it was completely useless waste of time. Putin has nothing left. He has nothing left to escalate. He has nothing left to threaten. He has only the ability to throw man and hope that the West will stop, that the West will break. But we already know that the West won't, and I'm going to cover it in the video tomorrow that's going to be covering both Munich, and it will cover the overall global agenda of the other countries. Thank you so much for watching for today. Thank you so much to all of the supporters of the channel. I love you all, guys, and I'll see you next time.